you want to practice it in your daily life, just shift the concept from being a meditator to an individual who practices the oxygenation of beautiful states of mind. Everyone's an activist if you assume I cannot leave activism unless I forget the quality of my Dharma breathing. So stop forgetting. Be responsible with yourself. Everyone pollutes or inhabits beautifully. The most important act of activism today is to be in emotional integrity in the most heightened way that you consider respectful to your presence, where you are, with whom you're with, and let that be the evidence, should you die, of the greatest gift that you gave to the future of life.
Welcome back to the Future is Beautiful podcast. It's been a while since series 2, and as always, it feels like so much has been going on that we've wanted to speak to, such as the UK and other governments declaring a climate emergency, the start of 5G testing, the proposed shifts in abortion laws, and the rise of separatist politics, to name just a few. But a break has been needed, and now we are excited to be back for series 3. I want to take a moment to honour the life of Polly Higgins, who left her body on Easter Sunday. I know this has been devastating news for so many in our community, but it was such an inspiring, open and celebratory experience of death. You can find the Facebook group Pollylicious if you want to connect with others who knew her or were moved by her. Please do listen to her conversation with us and share it with others so they can be inspired by her story. She had a dream of 1 million of us becoming Earth protectors, so please head to the Stop Ecocide page and sign up. I also want to honour Barbara Marx Hubbard, who I was hoping to interview last year, who also passed away this spring and was a very inspiring futurist. I highly recommend you look up her work, and I love her attitude on ageing. And as always, I want to say a huge thank you to you for continuing to listen and share the podcast whilst we were off air, and for our new patrons and all the patrons who have continued to support us through the break. There are 90 of you now, and it's covering about 10% of our costs, which is very helpful. A shout out to our new patrons: William Everett, Molly Stevenson, Misha Van Musa, Dan Burgess, Harriet Sams, Bobala Sarah Buddha, Ursula Grunwald, Kenneth Stewart, Fran Cranfield, Gavin Milne, Nisha Prakash, Panna McKay, Robert Gold, Eliza Flanagan, Alex Delicola, Christine Morrow, Hannah Ludlow, Hereward Gabriel, and Nick Turner. Thank you so much for all of your support, and if you haven't become a patron yet and you want to, please do get on and just make a donation, even if it's so small. It really, really helps us, and it makes us know that you are listening and that this show is useful for you as well. I was sharing in my last note to you that I'm exploring new ways of holding community space and opening up for that path of living from our hearts and with the practices that support us in being resilient for this time. And I'm going to be launching an online community called Presence Collective this summer. I'll share more about it next week, but if you're curious, and you can go to our website and click on courses. For this week, my guest is Alan Clements, who was a Buddhist monk in Myanmar until he was asked to leave by Burma's military authorities in 1984. He is now an author, journalist, called by Amnesty International one of the most important and compelling voices of our times. His books include Wisdom for the World and Mindful Advice to Our Nation, Aung San Suu Kyi, The Voice of Hope, and A Future to Believe in. He also hosts meditation, Dharma talks, retreats, and workshops all around the world. Here, we discuss meditation and beautiful states of mind, intimacy, and sacred activism. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community, or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives. When we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Alan, welcome to the show. It's an absolute delight to have you here. I very much enjoyed when we were at Tunshe, this beautiful conference on sacred leadership recently, that the questions that you asked and the comments that you made, and I thought, okay, this is a man I need to get on the show.
That's nice to hear. I was so curious about those two gentlemen that I spoke with. Yeah, the whole thing was a dance in heightened consciousness. It was beautiful.
Definitely. From hearing a little bit about your life story, one of the things that is really interesting is that you made this decision as a young man to go to Burma and to live in a monastic setting. And you left not of your own accord because you were kicked out mm-hmm. and then thrown back into the real world, or however we want to call it. I don't know how real it is. Can you share? I guess I'm interested in two things. Like, one is like the impulse to go and take yourself into that kind of setting, and then another part is what you've learned about that particular spiritual path.
Mm-hmm. I was a child of the 60s and the 70s. What I mean by that, where there was a revolution in music. I was deeply immersed in the non-recreational use of entheogens and psychedelics. I was into philosophy and poetry and art. That led to a deep inner convulsion to keep looking and feeling into this nature of consciousness. I had no idea that consciousness could be so demonstratively felt until I put a small dose of LSD on my tongue when I was 15. And coupled with art and music and love and intimacy, it just made real on the promise of the meaning of psychedelic, mind manifest. And we could see in our moments of yoga, which I got involved in yoga and I got into diet, became a vegetarian. We had a day of silence even when I was 18 years old, once a week. We could see the influence of consciousness on consciousness. And that became very compelling, that you could actually do things with consciousness to enhance its luminosity, its dexterity, its freedom. And so I didn't want to continue to use psychedelics as that vehicle, because coming down was more problematic than going up. What Alan Watts said, that when you get the message, you hang up the phone. And so the only real study of consciousness came out of the East. And so we went overland to India, not so much to find answers, but to ask questions and to feel in this ancient culture those who had made a life out of the study of consciousness. And only though when I got to Burma, when I saw Buddhism and Buddhist meditation, did I realize these people, these boys and girls, these men and women, monks and nuns, sitting still and just focusing inward and through this interior world that I knew so well from yoga and from diet and from psychedelics. And so that made a lot of sense to me. Do this in the most organic and trusted tradition in the world. And so I appealed to the head monk there in the monastery. I'd read his small book on meditation, The Power of Mindfulness. And unbeknownst to me, it was a dictatorship in Burma at that time. He said, you can only stay for 7 days. And he pointed me to a monastery in Sri Lanka where I began to practice more ardently. But I really wanted to be in his company to train with him. And so I went back to Los Angeles and eventually became so desirous of this unrequited meditative love affair with this monastery and this teacher that I ordained with him when he was on tour in America, in New York, and took the risk of going back on a 7-day visa and appealed to the government. And they granted me one of the first longer-term visas to study meditation. And so I fulfilled this kind of deep inner for lack of better terms, this metamorphical impulse that's probably embedded in every human being to take on a higher order frequency and to study that. And so the vocation of the study of consciousness became synonymous with meditation. And there I found myself in the age of 27 or 28, having been doing yoga for 10 years and ardently taking care of diet and health, looking at what it meant to look and feel into the recesses of consciousness and to study the elements of consciousness that enhance its frequency, its luminosity, its liberty, its enlightenment. And there I sat until the monks told me that the dictator has sent people to say that you must leave. And this happened 4 times in the course of 5 years. And each time I went to Australia, I went to Sri Lanka, I went to India, and eventually to America. But it's very difficult to meditate and be a monk in these other countries. It's after the 4th attempt to stay longer term with my spiritual family, I cried and decided to re-enter the world as a layperson. My teacher told me very distinctly, Alan, the form is useful, but it's awareness that liberates. And to keep nurturing these seeds of purification within you, and you will awaken. That's the only teaching that I had. And so I went back to America and did what I did as a monk, which was to be in these temporarily created meditative monastic environments, which we called meditation retreats. I did them in Europe and America and Canada and Australia. And I lived my life that way for the next 5 or 6 years, teaching nonstop. That's a little bit of the trajectory.
Can I ask why you found it difficult or kind of impossible to meditate in the way that you had in these other countries?
How did I find it so difficult?
Yeah. What is it that makes it?
Well, traditional meditation, as I learned in this center in Rangoon, which I think it's important to name it, it's called the Mahasi Meditation Centre, and it was founded by the former Prime Minister U Nu, and it's considered by scholars of mindfulness and meditation to be the epicenter where the worldwide lay mindfulness movement began in 1947. And of course, it's like yoga, it's ubiquitous globally, but mindfulness is Forbes 500, it's in schools. Primarily, it all roots back to this one monastery with this one monk.
Wow.
And attributed to the teachings of the Buddha, the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on mindfulness in all postures. The difficulty, to answer your question, the difficulty that I found was that meditation is taught in an extremely controlled environment. In our monastery, which there were 227 branch centers in Burma alone, mandatory silence, no eye contact except with your teacher, mandatory schedule to follow, 1 hour sitting, followed by 1 hour walking, 8 one-hour sitting meditations in a day, 6 one-hour walking meditations, and that's 14 hours alone. There's no intimate contact either with self or other. 4 hours sleep is the maximum, and you're encouraged to work down from that. There's 2 meals a day. The last meal is at noon. Nothing solid after 12 noon until breakfast the following morning. And all you do are encouraged to slow down and to pay attention to the most predominant experience at whatever appears predominant at any of the sense doors. In the absence of something through your eye, your ear, your nose, focus on your breathing. So when you sit, you're told and encouraged to be with each breath as if it's your first and your last, okay? Now, we could go so slowly here to exaggerate into the direct experience of meditation. What does it mean to be not just present, but to feel the intimacy of the moment, the intimacy of your sensation, the intimacy of your thoughts, the intimacy of memory, the subconscious? That interplay is meditation. And I say this to highlight how guarded the environment is so that an individual has no other obligation than to feel. See, think, feel, know what is occurring right here and now. And it's very easy to do in a monastery, although somewhat challenging, but you're around boys and girls. We had up to 10,000 people sometimes in our monastery, all in silence. With a teacher, you have a tribe, you have a family who's supporting you with deep inward mindful introspection to develop mindful intelligence, to feel the nature of consciousness and how you unknowingly conscript yourself into self-generated suffering, and how you could do the opposite, which is to elevate self-generated freedom. And that's the only agenda. Out in the world, the agenda is very different. It's busy. It's so complex.
It's so fast.
And you don't have your family. You don't have your tribe. You don't have people, oh, the agenda here is to work and to eat and to drive to work. And it's like the economic apparatus is so prevalent to survive. And the allure of desire and the avoidance of unpleasant phenomena is so strong that the agenda quickly shifts. I'm not denigrating that, but it's very hard to meditate in the way that you can meditate in a monastery or a meditation center in the world. So there really isn't meditation off the cushion. And I've often said that the best form of yoga off the mat is yoga in the world. And it should be yoga in the world that you take to your mat, not yoga off the mat that you take to the world. Meditation is meant to be done in a completely controlled environment and not to make a career out of it. It's for the development of insight to change your way of thinking and behaving and speaking. Okay. You cannot say enough about meditation being essential to have a good teacher. I don't know how meditators can survive without a good guide. I don't think you should practice yoga without a really good training with a teacher. You can harm yourself. You could be in wrong alignments. You could do it thinking that it's right and it's wrong. The same with meditation. So that was hard for me. And eventually, after 20, 25 years of going back to the monastery and continuing practice, eventually I learned what they called the higher teachings of how to bring meditation into all postures, all times, all states, all contexts. But you just don't go there from the first time that you meditate. So,
except that's kind of where everyone in the world goes first.
Say again?
Well, if somebody is picking up meditation and they've been told, okay, if you meditate, it's going to help you be more productive at work or whatever the kind of the current ways in for meditation are for a lot of people, then you tend to go first into these practices of how to really just bring it as a small part in your daily life that runs through you.
See, I had the agenda to follow in the footsteps as a son of the Buddha. I was deeply immersed in the Buddhist tradition from South Asia. And to be very honest with you, I was very taken not by the practice of meditation to become more present, but I was driven by the concept of enlightenment. And it made so much sense to me that someone offered a system of practices where the individual could reclaim all forms of absconding from their own journey and take 100% accountability and responsibility for your own mind. And they offered a teaching for 100% accountability. And here are the systems and the practices and states of consciousness that was drilled home to us. If you develop these states of consciousness, the result of that, the causal effect of developing these states in a systematic way, will free you from the gravity or the centrifugal force of fear, of greed, anger, and delusion. And that made so much ontological sense to me. If only you do this, you cannot avoid the result, cause and effect. No God, no worship, no faith, nothing needed other than direct effort to apply yourself to the cultivation of these states. And all I wanted to do would be free from fear, free from greed, free from anger, free from delusion. It made so much sense to me. Call it idealism, but the allure of enlightenment and the degrees of insight into wisdom were so compelling to me that I gave myself over to see, are they true? And that form of meditation was very compelling. It was not about being an integrated, whole, sexually dynamic, a family man in the world who was living mindfully, keeping my stress and anxiety at bay with 2 cars, a garage, and 3 designer kids in a Land Rover going to yoga school. I mean, although those things exist, but it wasn't my interest. And meditation, as I learned, it wasn't meant to be brought into the world in that way. You don't do downward facing dog walking down the sidewalk. There's a way to inhabit your body. But ultimately, I was driven again by the psychedelic metaphor. I was an astronaut of consciousness. I wanted to see heightened states of mind. I wasn't compelled by being fully embodied, which is a whole second half of my journey now. So that's the short answer.
So before I asked the question, you were about to share what you were taught in terms of meditation in the world.
Later on, I was taught about meditation in the world. It took a lot to get it out of them. They don't teach meditation to integrate into the world. They teach meditation as metaphor for the evolution of mindful intelligence to live more skillfully in decision-making in the world. What I mean by that is meditation should be understood from where I sit as a synonym for two things: overcoming self-generated anger, fear, and judgment through the unwillingness to own judgment, blame, scapegoating, and projection. I mean, I don't know how an individual can call themselves a yogi or a spiritual being or a meditator without the deep study of the machinations of greed, fear, and anger, and call them their near enemies, or those states of mind that disguise those self-denigrating states, that allow them their fluidity without shame or worry. Blame, judgment, dogma, self-indoctrination. What is the energy of collusion with yourself? How do you enable behaviors and speech and thoughts that denigrate you and other without even knowing it? Look at the disguises of narcissism and pride today and ego, and how easily they're seen as virtues and masquerade as confidence and certainty. So the study of how you self-denigrate and how you elevate isn't found in a monastery. You can do it anywhere, anytime, should you have the interest, for me, of developing the mindful intelligence to inhabit the good, the true, and the beautiful, and overcome the denigrating. So they teach that when they feel that you're confident enough in your meditative practice to hear several different teachings, which is simple: that meditation is synonymous with overcoming self-generated conflict, equally with how you engage higher elevated beauty, and the deep study of how you unknowingly blame the world for how you feel, through the study of the state of mind called collusion, enabling, scapegoating, blame, righteousness, and judgment, and pride. Those colors on the palette of inner consciousness are the basis of finger painting for beginning meditators in Burma. Without that, you're not reliable. With that, you're accountable. So long as you have good friends, teachers, and a tribe to hold you somewhat accountable. Is that once that dyad is felt, and I have a working relationship to the meditative practice of seeing those two dyads in direct, intimate energy. Hear me. You and I are breathing. All of us who are listening to this podcast are breathing. We would never be satisfied with thinking that I could breathe enough today in order to satisfy my needs for tomorrow. You can't hold it in the lungs of a camel. Mm-hmm. It needs to be done by you and by me individually, but it's shared. It needs to be done repeatedly, and we have to do it well. So we have to constantly remind ourselves, beyond the instinct, to do it well, do it continually, and to have an intimate relationship with it, possibly being sacred, meaning that it could end one breath at a time. The same thing with meditation has to be brought into consciousness as that which oxygenates the good, the true, and the beautiful. You have to be feeling it as a direct, intimate experience, as intimate as oxygen. So the Dharma and yoga and meditation have to be practiced or lived intimately like breathing. It can't be postponed. So it's not a here and now thing. It's too dogmatic. It's everything. That's a better way to talk about being present. It's everything. And so when you get the everything model into your soul and you breathe into your yoga, your dharma of now, time, presence, overcoming fear, anger, and delusion, elevating good, true, and beautiful, then what do? Well, we would often joke in the monastery, what do you do in a monastery? You get up and you go to bed and you eat in between, which they say you're just changing postures all day long. So breathe in all postures. Oxygenate your liberty in all postures. So it's called all posture meditation. And where I learned in a monastery, you practice all posture meditation in a very safe, sanctified environment. Standing, sitting, walking, reclining, and they call it everything in between. So there's eating meditation. When you're talking to your teacher, there's communication meditation. When you're looking out through your eye, there's seeing meditation. And when you're listening, there's listening meditation. When you're eating, tasting, swallowing, all those kind of things. When you're washing your face, there's washing your face meditation. And it's really called, which your podcast is A Beautiful Future. Is that something close to it?
Yeah, the future is beautiful.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that I was quite touched by that concept because few people know that the classical traditional word for meditation within the Theravada Buddhist tradition, as was taught by me, by my teachers, Mahasi Sayadaw and his successor, Sayadaw U Pandita in Burma, it's called bhavana, Bhavana, which means the beautification of the mind. In fact, Mahasi Sayadaw's original monk's name was Usobana, which are beautiful states of consciousness. And so meditators aren't practicing meditation in a monastery, they're practicing bhavana, which is the direct and intimate engagement of beautiful states of mind. And so they work on the premise that consciousness, and I heard this from the early 80s, late 70s, consciousness should be seen and felt like a flower opening. And in order for that opening to take place, an individual, a meditator, a yogi, is encouraged to study the nutrients of consciousness, what opens it, what is the oxygen of consciousness, what is the light of consciousness, what are the minerals of consciousness. You don't examine the darkness between the petals and expect it to open. That's a pathological model. So you invest as a meditator in beautiful states of mind, and you are encouraged to overcome the gravity of self-denigrating states of mind. But the way to do that is to displace them through identity with beauty. So meditation is not something that you practice 5 minutes to overcome stress, but if you want to practice it in your daily life, just shift the concept from being a meditator to an individual who practices the oxygenation of beautiful states of mind. So you always have that reference to breathing. When you're looking into the eyes of your lover, a friend, a child, to God, yourself, in any form of asana that you wish to inhabit, you are beautifying that with what? And this is where we were encouraged after some development in the world. What are the colors or the nutrients of consciousness that you wish to choose, not follow as a Buddhist? So we were encouraged as Dharma artists, so to speak. What are the colors on your palette, Alan, that you wish to inhabit, that you call beautiful states of mind, that you then take the action and begin to color and play on the canvas of life? And then when you're in a more intimate place with otherness, mutual belonging, then you share the canvas of shared space in a meditative way that's co-creative. And this is meditation in daily life. This is how we were taught. To go from the singular of self-liberation to the second style of practice, which was called liberation through world relations. I'm always in relation. I'm not looking at you as less or more or even, except that you are a woman, an entity, a being that I cannot live without any more than I can live without oxygen. And I cannot be who I am without the engagement of my beauty on the terms of integrity with you. And of course, it becomes complex when you do things that I don't want, when I have an intimate expectation from you and I'm not so-called met. Well, the meditator brings unmetness awareness and takes as much responsibility from blaming you for not meeting that fear in me, not needing that. You promised, you were faithful to that commitment. Okay, well, that may be true, but there's a more skillful approach, which would be to have empathy and compassion and safety. I'm not going to run from you. Okay, I know that you did what you did based on shame and fear, namaste, but I'm here with you. I'm going to grow with you. I'm going to love you into the future. I bring this up because meditation has something so far beyond the word that it is the totality of yoga. It's the totality of the Dharma. It's the totality of the embodied with the spiritual. And I call it the reclaiming of freedom and authenticity for the totality of everyday life. That's another way to look at meditation. Reclaiming freedom, reclaiming authenticity, reclaiming everyday life.
Thank you for all of that. And I especially love the explanation of the beautiful, because it really does, what you shared, capture why this podcast is called what it's called, and what the deeper impulse underneath it is. That, yeah, for me, like, it's not a podcast about kind of hope. It's about what it is that we can open up in ourselves and in each other, and what's possible to create. But it comes from this place. Beautiful. I can't even explain it in words. The audience can't see. I'm doing something with my hands.
Yes. Well, it's a felt reality, as intimate as intimacy is felt. And what makes it compelling to me, although I want to stay a child in the spirit. I don't want to assume anything mature. I want to become younger and more innocent and innocent in this spirit where the mystery is larger than knowing. I say that is that the intelligence of beautification is an important concept. And so many of us analogously can easily relate to dance and art and music and intimacy. Call it the interplay of love and closeness. We know those different styles of creativity and shared or mutual creativity. The wisdom of that, the mindful intelligence of that creativity allows you to, there is a wisdom to choosing colors on my palette of inner being. I was an artist. We're all artists. We all love music. There's someone created what we're listening to called the static dance, what we're dancing to. Someone created that digitally. We listen to musicians play. They were trained and now they're in the fluidity of their own organic expression that gives us this beautiful music. The same thing meditatively and spiritually and yogically. There's an intelligence to that learning. I call it Dharma literacy or Dharma art or Dharma music. You can learn it. It's not faith-driven. It's not dogma-driven. And so becoming, oh, wow, that really excited me when I was young. You can learn that, Mom? You can learn to play music like that. You can learn to sing like that. You can learn to paint like that. You can learn to love like that. Yes, you can learn it. And I think that's very important for people to be encouraged that you can learn this. It's not faith-driven. It's not how well you worship. It's not how many teacher trainings you teach or join. It's a felt, intelligent, artistic, savant-driven. You can speak out of the box. There are lots of people who innately drop into their deep genius when they hear, oh wow, there's an intelligence animating my life where I feel out of step with economies. I feel out of step with most people But when they're in the company of this wisdom, they feel like they actually have been born. That's beauty, and that you can enhance that beauty by choosing your colors on inner being. That's so important for people to know. I often encourage people to hold up your fingerprint, hold up your finger and just know that there's no two fingerprints the same like snowflakes. There's no two people who will do yoga or the Dharma or make love the same. When we talk about authenticity, it's the radical ownership, so to speak, the radical immersion in uniqueness. That's what love is. And how do you want to beautify and create from in that uniqueness? Takeaway? What is the color of authenticity? What informs your authenticity? Don't just stay with the color of authenticity because you want to mix it with other colors. What's the color of integrity? What's the color of accountability? What's the color of my sensitivity to the impact of my art and presence on you? What's the color of empathy? Very few people can switch from pride to empathy. I care about you as essential to me. So these different colors, and I would encourage people, if you feel inspired, to make a note in your emerging Dharma book. What are the colors on your inner palette that you want to learn to play within, to identify with skillfully, and then to paint with through your eye and your ear, your body, your mind and your body, and your heart?
So beautiful. I have two questions on this before I want to take us somewhere else, because I know there's so many things we can talk about. The first is this phrase that you used, the good, the truth, the beautiful. And I wanted to ask about the word good, because there's a lot of teaching around good and bad not existing. And the second part of it is, I know in myself, and I can imagine for many of our friends listening, we know that we are nowhere near the 100% accountability place. I'm currently in a process where I feel a lot more aware of certain aspects of where that gap is. And I'm also aware that there's more that I'm not aware of, right? Mm-hmm. And so how do you recommend that for those of us that are not in this life going to go and taste deep monastic life, how do we be more courageous and actually move into that space towards 100% accountability?
Okay, I think I hear you, and if I don't respond in a way that you're intending the question, don't hesitate to say so. The issue of good, I don't couple it with should, but I would like to invite, which I try to as the basis of my presence, my dignity, to do what is right and good by my mind and my body, my family, my teachers, and to do what's good by other. And I think it is intimately connected to the emotionality of empathy and what I would call, the concept in South Africa, Ubuntu, which I am who I am through the emotion of feeling you as inseparable from me. That which dignifies you, I feel, is something that dignifies me. So putting myself in the mind and the body of other allows me to feel how you may feel in my presence. And if I am you, feeling you as me, I would want you to do to me what I would like then to do to you. That deep, intimate belonging, that reciprocity. So then I'm inspired to do good by you, which means how do I look at you without habit? How do I look at you and feel you and interrelate with you with respect? High respect. And of course, one can't always assume that where I'm coming from is going to be good, but I want to aspire to, well, I should put it this way. At this stage of life, I feel like all I want is beauty, intimacy, high reverence, high fidelity, frequency between me and other. I take care with what I put into my body, how I touch my body, whom I'm allowed touch me. As I talked about earlier, before we started recording, I'm a firm, intimate believer in going so slowly when there's energy for me as a heterosexual to be attracted to someone, to the point of celibacy, to reverence for energy, not even mindful intimacy or mindful sex, but just the deep harmonic of coexisting together without the need to act forward. So taking the habit out of my presence. So the good. What does it mean to do good by you? Because you are me and you are everyone. And I feel the integrity of doing good by you simply because you are a fellow inhabitant of this precious world. I mean, I'll put this in a tangible way. I remember some time back, I was reading a story in brief of a gentleman who passed away, who was a young man, was in a town, possibly in Poland, and he was picked up by the Gestapo as a Jew and put into a boxcart destined for Auschwitz. And they were stripped of their clothing. It was frigid night temperatures. And he tells this story as it was told of how he was packed in, and next to him was a very old man that he recognized as a shopkeeper in his neighborhood. And he felt this instinct as he was shivering, and the old man would likely die very quickly. And there was no clothing. He just instinctually took his hands, both hands, and started to rub this man's neck and his arms, his body. And he kept doing this hour by hour throughout the night as the train labored on to this destination of death. And he fought through the fatigue, the pain, the anguish, his own freezing body, and kept it up and increased the intensity of it as the night temperatures became even more freezing. And as the first light of dawn broke through the boxcart and lit up these men, and I'm not sure women too, naked in this boxcart, he looked around in this first glimmer of light and he saw that everyone was dead except himself and the old man. And I have no way of knowing the emotions of this story except that they both break my heart and break my heart open to this Ubuntu, this mutuality, instinctually responding in crisis to doing what's right and good and beautiful by other. Saved himself and saved this man for perhaps a minute longer. But it kept alive a value, the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so whatever that might mean to you, however you might hear that, however you have an example in your own life, there's something beautiful about being the recipient of the good and knowing that that old man is you, that old man is me, that young man is you, that young woman is me. And even in the most extreme cases in Burma, where I've spent these years, I was blessed to do a book of conversations with the Nobel laureate, Aung San Suu Kyi, back in '95 when she was released from 6 years of house arrest. And she and I share the same Buddhist teacher, Sayadaw U Pandita. And she and her country, you may know, a feminine-inspired nonviolent revolution to challenge toxic masculinity and toxic patriarchy and a very violent succession of dictators that tortured, that created a nation of 50 million hostages held against their will, where there were no regard for human rights. And she took a decidedly powerful, feminine, inspired, spiritual position, which was to not vilify even men who should go to the gas chamber. She chose not to demonize as spiritual virtue. And so I say, even in the most extreme cases, the good can be something that we consider the nutrient of our soul, so to speak, the nutrient of our integrity, that without conscience and without choosing the good from the bad, the right from the wrong, and knowing that delineation, we could be misguided. And so in an extreme case like this, we have a woman, a country, and she's not the only ones, who are choosing, even in the face of you as enemy, I cannot be free without you. And so that's challenging the duality of God, calling God on its own bluff. I refuse to participate in the politics of existential apartheid. I'm going to go beyond that and choose the good. So therein lies where it makes sense to me, because it feels right. It doesn't always, in my mind, know it's right, but I have to really get out of my comfort zone and get uncomfortable to put my mind in the mind of another. Especially something intimate where it's a lover who has done wrong by our agreement. And you know it's fear, you know it's trauma-based, you know it's shame, and you interpret it, but still the pain, the struggle, the sleepless nights, and how many boys and girls around the world are on pharmaceutical drugs to mitigate the struggle, and how hard it is to take responsibility that what we do wrongly in life is often born from unrecognized fear, unrecognized delusion. So it's hard to have compassion when it's intimate. But we're called upon to keep, okay, I'm going to aspire to do the good because it's good by me. And I think that's the last point I'd like to make is the study of meditation for me, the study of yoga, the study of the Dharma, is what is the nutritional value in the state of mind for me? And many people justify anger because they feel revenge is right, because they're not aware that they suffer first when they're angry. It's like picking up fecal matter and throwing it. You stink. Picking up a hot iron burning ball, you burn. So meditation teaches you the accountability and the impact of the state on you. And I've seen many monks and nuns, weeks, months, years into their trainings. The more they sensitize to conscience within consciousness, the soul of consciousness could be said to be conscience, guided by integrity, and how deeply we feel into that primordial integrity, that behaviors that you may long have forgotten, thoughts that you thought that you had no memory of, you become sensitive to. And they're felt as immediate as if you're making love with them right now or being chained by them in the immediacy of the moment from the past coming back. You decathex, you thaw, you feel into buried memories, and the subconscious becomes ever present. And all of a sudden you feel, oh my God, I killed that frog. I remember one monk having buried 30 years prior the murder of someone. And it came back after those 30 years.
A person.
A person. And you can see them over the course of a month beginning to cry in their meditation. Couldn't admit it. And eventually I was in the room when he admitted it to his teacher. What is it that troubles you, sir? You know, they just broke down and said, I remember murdering someone like that. I remember killing them. And I buried it. I never felt it anymore. And then having the humility, the ethical courage to ask their teacher, what should I do by this recognition? And the teacher said, the wisdom would be to act on that as if it happened today. You go back and address the issue. You could see the joy in this person's eyes. He felt how good that was to redeem even the core behavior that you cannot outrun your history. In this case, I don't know existentially whether you can or not, but I found that remarkable to address the question that you're bringing up, which is, why is good important? Because it can haunt you. It may not always come back around. It's cliched to say what you put out, you get back. There's lots of people who are without conscience. There's no remorse, no regret. But those among us who can hear, I think it's, why not be a candle in the dark?
Yeah, because when you don't act out of your own integrity, it hurts. And the things that trouble you later on, it might not be that you killed somebody, but often that's when I could have said this, I could have responded like that, I could have, and that's where we get ourselves sometimes into these mind games and these patterns. And if we can show up kind of in that space more often than not, then we save ourselves.
Well, you brought up very beautifully the issue of impact and, say, accountability. I mean, if there could be a moment on the earth within our communities and tribes, even just among us few seekers here in Ubud, where we had a day, an hour, a yoga session a week, a festival of reconciliation, in which we weren't there to teach or only to celebrate and joy, but a new form of ecstatic dance, which is to reconcile those places of denial and self-abandonment where we have committed transgressions in thought, speech, and actions, and we come together to reveal the ways in which we've hurt. You can imagine a symposium where people reveal the ways in which they've lied to themselves and others. And look at the amount of pain that we've created through our own behaviors. Look at I dare say, the shadow of the enlightened seeker today is the carnage that I see, the psychological carnage that I see through relationships. How much pain there has been created and continually being created through some forms of relationships, promises, ideals that reach crescendo level. I want to have your baby. I want to be married to you. I want to break bread for eternity with this growth. You and I are committed. We have found the other side of the soul. It's not a cliche to say that I cannot be who I am without you. I'm a believer that my soul is fundamentally incomplete without the other. I firmly believe that you can never find wholeness on your own. I've studied the Indian text, the Buddhist text. Even when you look at the Buddha, the quintessential expression of perfection, really, when you look at it theologically and conceptually. His wife, Yasodhara, you look at one discourse of the Buddha, the Yasodhara Sutta, she became a nun years after he left the palace, the night that she gave birth to their son, Rahula. And she eventually too became a nun, but with tremendous hardship in the process, but became fully enlightened on her own terms. And she called the Buddha and all of the chief disciples together on the precipice of her passing, and she had some psychic ability to know this according to the text. It's a very overlooked discourse of the Buddha where his wife, Yasodhara, tells Gautama, says, listen, for countless lifetimes we were together. We talk about twin flames and soulmates. I know that you meet people that you go, oh my God. And it's not an easy, oh my God. It's like, oh my God, there's so much energy here. There's so much familiarity. How did it happen? Deep existential symmetry. You are meant to be with this person and it's not going to be easy. But how to bring more consciousness to this next round together. And I'm going to fight the centrifugal karmic forces of separation by being as faithful and committed. And she's telling us, the Buddha says, do you know how many times I've dealt with your transgressions? You know how many times I've dealt with you that you've promised me to have a family and you abandoned me for another woman? Do you know how many times that you've ran from the intimacy of a committed marriage? Do you know how many times I've been patient and determined to hold you in the embrace of the feminine? This is my language, but it's there. By way of saying, and I could not be who I am without you. I chose to grow and liberate through the struggle rather than to have you in security. But you did not listen so many lifetimes. Namaste. And she took her piece and she said, thank you. I have fulfilled the vision of why I'm alive in countless lifetimes to be who I am. I am who I am despite you and with you. And she took her, they call it parinibbana, and died in this enlightened state. But it's a very interesting story to bring into our personal lives. How to be accountable, how to be responsible, how to be more aware of the woman. And I say this as a kind of a, where I sit today, listen to the woman. It's the new mantra, it's the new yoga, it's the new meditation. You don't supplicate, you don't denigrate, but there's a second guide to your mindfulness practice and your yoga practice. It's called the feminine, not just inside. Listen to her. What does she see and feel about the way in which you could think something through differently? And are you willing to change not just over time, but on the spot? How rare it is to find energy where you feel this level of heightened symmetry. Seize it. And so many men, I say this because it's not really a question you're asking, sorry to digress, are phobic, a shadow of their spiritual life. They're phobic of intimacy.
It's definitely a question that I'm asking, just not one that I asked.
And I'm going to take a role here as a kind of a semi-beginning elder within the spiritual yogic community that, you know, come on, men, show up and be humble in the face of an intimate, elegant, romantic, erotic, transformational love affair. Women are so amazing. If you have one that's showing up with you in which you have a heightened sense of intellectual, mystical, cognitive liberty and evolution going on with it, you're dancing in shared music. You're making love with her eyes, her energy, her mind, and her body. Yes, and her yoni and her nipples and her body and her flesh too, but not that alone. Listen to her. Give up polyamory. Give up open relationships. Be open with one. You can find oneness through her. And it's not old-fashioned. It's the way of the future. And so I would say, come to my retreats, come to my talks, talk to me about it. I'm very open about this. But I'm a real believer that what I'm saying is absolutely true. And the next evolution, I would say, for global transformation. It's an issue of love and trust and accountability and growing through the faithfulness to a commitment to states of consciousness rather than running from them. And you cannot do it on your own. You can't find it in a cave. You can't find it in a monastery alone. I think today it must come through the eyes of another, the heart of another, and the patience of another. My experience with men is they're driven primarily by fear and ideals, especially spiritual men, and often unrealistic ideals. Mm-hmm. And one of the great missings that I've seen is that very few men actually have conscious men in their life. Mm-hmm. Women have them like a flock of women. You're so open, so diverse, so intimate, so real, so present. Most men do not relate in an open-hearted way with each other. And I don't know what women often think about men when they're alone with other men, but it's not at all what I think women think or know about what men do. And being in a role of mentoring and coaching a lot of men, it's shocking to me, a lot of conscious men, meditating men, psychological men, breathworking men, ecstatic dance men, tantrified men, how shadowed they are. And one of the biggest fears is in not understanding the beauty of the woman, not understanding the beauty of children, and not understanding the beauty of commitment.
Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative, Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs. Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty. So what about this impulse to be on my own, to discover this on my own? There's something I have to go and do by myself.
Okay,
which
great
both
point.
men and women
Absolutely.
are doing in the current world.
Absolutely. You're fully right and empowered, needless to say that. I'm just saying the obvious. This is the difference, because the playbook for modernity, the playbook for modern intimacy is that my freedom on my own is one thing. I love it, adore it. But I'm signing up in a relationship with you, and the freedom that we have is far more free than me being free alone. And within that, there are parameters of acceptability. And I do believe that one should be in high fidelity on an intimate sexual level. And two, I work from the premise that why be with someone in a committed relationship where honesty isn't the priority? Yes, have an attraction anywhere. Come to me first with it. Talk to me about it. We could even integrate it, perhaps even on a kind of a transpersonal, energetic level, even have a threesome. But I am the priority, and you're the priority. And the freedom of this exploration is more liberated even when you do it on your own, in thinking that what you're doing is what you're doing alone. It's just far better to have, I think, a companion, another voice, another set of mind and body and ears, for me personally, than the idea of doing things alone. But, what do I know? I think it's, you cannot create a totalitarian spiritual psychology around human behavior. But I often find that most everyone who espouses the alone path will eventually come back to, I can't do it without you. It's just it's the metaphysical instinct of liberation, I think, to acknowledge wanting to be in relationship. I mean, we're obviously in relationship all the time. It's anathema to think that you're alone. You're not on the side of the river looking the river move. You're always in the water.
Absolutely.
And conversely with that, let me just say one more thing while you're thinking. On my palette of colors, I would want to be very aware that with the woman I'm with, she's very aware of fear, of insecurity, of possessiveness, of control, of historical struggles and the impact of those energies on present time presence. How conversant are you metaphysically, spiritually, cognitively with the nature of your own mind? So guys, it's like, don't just sign up because she's saying, I want to be with you. What's the artistry of that space? How well do you play in the music of this acid mystical jazz together? And that's the study of consciousness. And how well does she speak about states of consciousness, and how well does she feel into the musical notes of her liberty? So be very aware of, is my fear well-founded? And if so, be courageous enough to explore that when you have chemistry. I really would like to be with you, and let's make a commitment for the next 2 weeks. And let's just commit to be intimately friendly and play and walk and swim and bathe and dance and eat and sleep and talk and feel in this shared emerging tapestry of energy between us, and just there's nothing that we can't do. Let's just keep the dialogue going. And I think that's, build a relationship, architect a relationship that's on the terms of your uniqueness, not from a book. Foster your own form of tantra, foster your own form of dance, your own shared artistry, and feel. What does it feel like to be together? And what are these states of mind that you're dancing to? Having that trust in her mindful intelligence or his intelligence allows for a deep relaxation of the soul to look outward rather than only at each other. Because there is a fear that comes up sometimes of being controlled. And look at the history we have with examples of relationships that denigrate and become violent, and how easy it is to take something remarkably beautiful and run from it. But when you do have something remarkably beautiful, that's when we need each other. We need friends, mentors, coaches, a support system help emerge this next new dimension of a modern relationship. That's what I'm really espousing. So I'm not saying one or the other. It's not a black and white thing, but I am a firm believer, as you could hear, on the power of one. Call it one at a time, rather than the one, but one at a time with very intelligent levels of faithfulness to what and commitments to how long. Could be a week, it could be a month, probably no more than 3 months. And let's just reassess after that 3-month period. And definitely have what I would call a commitment to high quality time together, because people are very busy.
I'm curious as to your take on the relationship between our spirituality and our activism, for want of a better word, the way that we show up in the world, the way in which we pay attention to things that are happening in the world, to where there's suffering, to where there's waste. Yeah, how do we use our spirituality to be alert and aware and with our hearts open and present? And how do we stay open without getting so consumed in either our spirituality or the world and its issues that we kind of lose sight somehow, or we lose ourselves?
Dostoevsky, the great novelist, he had, among numerous profound statements and quotes, said, "Beauty is mysterious as well as terrible. God and the devil are fighting there, and the battlefield is the human heart." And I say that to say that what we see in the world, in all of its polarities and dualities, the beauty and the horrors, from the most splendid moments of lovemaking to the most terrifying, horrific expressions of genocide, which are happening simultaneous to this very moment, everywhere, inside us historically, and will always happen so long as there is an atmosphere that inhabitants in this planetary sphere breathe, emote, and live. There's a convulsion of this intrinsic battlefield within the DNA, the consciousness, the mind, call it whatever you will, in every inhabitant. Tracing all things back to how courageous can I be with being responsible for my own unrecognized inner convulsions is the role of the mystical activist, the sacred activist, the existential rebel who refuses to participate in the DNA of this convulsion. So being mindfully intelligent at core DNA is crucial. And take it out of the world of activism and bring it into deep, meditative, yogic congruence at source. Everyone is an activist. Everyone is concerned with oxygen. Everyone's concerned with living, not dying. Everyone's concerned with the quality of their interior and how unknowingly, if we fuse with denigrative forces, I will act in Hitler-like fashion and subscribe many people into the dogma of Nazism, and we have yet another Holocaust. All comes from human consciousness. That's just dealing with the anthropocentric issue of the human. Then there's animals. So we're intrinsically in a zone, a mystical zone here on this planet, where we have to deal with the DNA of greed, anger, and delusion, for lack of better terms. So activism is not an external thing, it's an internal thing. Number one. I think that's very important, that you cannot abscond from activism and transformation unless by the denial of an idea or a dogma. Because true transformation, true meditation, true yoga is the intimate, mindful exploration of human consciousness in context, inside to what's repressed and outside through the portals of the senses. Okay, point two. Where do you apply your presence? To be in symmetry to the Dharma and yoga and meditation being synonymous with breathing, you breathe now, on your own, where you are, in concern with context. But wherever I am, I'm going to breathe. Wherever I am, with whatever I'm doing, I'm going to be in responsible, mystical activist state of mind, mindfully, intelligently inhabiting the good, the true, and the beautiful, and doing all that I can to interrupt the convulsions of greed, anger, and delusion. Where? Here. When? Now. With whom? Me, with you. So you take it out of postponement, you take it out of practice, you take it out of, it is who I am. Everyone's an activist if you assume I cannot leave activism unless I forget the quality of my Dharma breathing. So stop forgetting. Be responsible with yourself. Everyone pollutes or inhabits beautifully. With that, one person at a time, even in revolutions that I've been around, not many, primarily in Burma with Aung San Suu Kyi and her colleagues, I've been blessed to be in and around these people who use nonviolence to challenge dictatorship. Their mantra was, let us be in loving, compassionate, non-vilification, one person at a time. And that's my model. And do all that I can, Alan, to inspire a heightened commitment to you, being that you and I are together right now, a heightened commitment to you, a heightened commitment to me, a heightened commitment to the unborn, that my presence right now will influence the future of consciousness. We're all inhabitants of people before us who lived and died either wisely empowering environmental or human rights or ignorantly denied them. But we're in somewhat of a safe zone right here. And so we're in that parade of transformation, if we so choose, one person at a time. And to heighten that commitment to reverential transformational presence. Thirdly, I would say to develop on our palates, our inner palates, the quality of patience, resilience, and vulnerability. That they are the safeguards of sanity. And it's an unfathomable tsunami of complexity that we're faced with. Even my daughter doesn't want to go to school anymore, 12 years old. The young Swede, Greta, is 16, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, is calling all children worldwide to boycott Fridays. The educational system of the people who we're supposedly to follow are in denial of what they're doing to annihilate the future of life. We can't participate in that except through an act of conscience and civil disobedience. It's remarkable. I've been from a generation that you mindfully watch your breath to become enlightened. A new generation is questioning whether there's even going to be oxygen. Is that a dilemma? It's an existential crisis we're in. Am I terrified? It's something deeper than terror. Am I alive within it? More alive than I've ever been. Is there hope in a new form of intimacy that says this moment is everything? The quality of what I bring to you is everything. Everything. Am I willing to live and die with you? Absolutely. And I think that's the most important act of activism today, is to be in emotional integrity in the most heightened way that you consider respectful to your presence, where you are, with whom you're with, and let that be the evidence, should you die, of your greatest gift that you gave to the future of life. With that resilience, patience, taking care, self-care to help support the relaxation of fear. There's a lot of fear in the world. There's lots of people right now that are starving, that are climate refugees. We're comfortable. We're in a safe zone, so to speak, although the streets are somewhat crazy here with scooters and how many bandaged people that, can no longer do yoga because they're almost crippled. There's a lot of stuff going on all the time. Vulnerability was the last thing I wanted to say. Is vulnerability to me is, it's a deeper form of hope. It's not relinquishing action. It's saying that I'm willing to feel into new places of openness with myself and you that may not immediately have a masculine response. And that in that deeper relaxation, I get closer to the pre-intuitive that might find a deeper inner voice that has a finer music than the music I've been listening to. I don't know about you, but I have a dumb phone that costs a hell of a lot of dumb money a month in order to have a lot of time on this thing, to the point that I've managed to consciously and mindfully turn off the timer of how much time I spend on it a day. And so this little dopamine pump in my hand that gives me an idea of how many people follow me and how many messages I get and how easy it is to communicate with everyone around the world on the time of this little pump that actually is run by fossil fuels, which everyone knows in the world are innately 100% poisonous. I'm a participant in a homicidal economy. I drive, I fly, I consume. I'm a hypocrite. So I think there's something to be said for all people around the world have a day of recognizing the necessity of including the color of hypocrisy on their palette and the vulnerability of that pretense to feel more deeply into a day of restraint, a week of restraint. And I think those would be very healthy measures to just stop for an hour or two or a week and to feel more vulnerable on what it means to be, like Gandhi. I'll close with this. When I'm not a study of history, but in his recognition after leaving South Africa and coming back to his native country, India, and feeling in a way like livestock under the slavery of the British, decided to instigate a revolution of conscience nonviolently, to stop participating in the machinery of oppression. And so on that famous salt march to the sea, he called upon people to stop work. Okay, we're called upon today in conscience to stop work. In your country of England, the people that you know very well, I only know from the outside of watching their interviews, the existential rebellion. They're basically saying, let's do Gandhi, let's call off working for the homicidal economy for a day, a week, a month, permanently, and not necessarily turn it all around, but begin to feel the vulnerability of a new dialogue of what could be possible in the collapse of the economy and the environment. I don't know well enough the data that we're not over the cliff or near-term extinction.
So we're talking about Extinction Rebellion and the awareness that they're raising, the actions.
Yeah, it could be that the action at this point is not non-action, but it's an emotional response, a heightened mystical, spiritual response of empathy and vulnerability to one, grieve the enormity of loss, the species that are dying by the minute, the people under siege right now worldwide. My country, America, we're a killing machine. We export violence and weapons. Iraq, ethnic cleansing, Afghanistan, mass murder. Look at Syria today, 12 million people displaced, 400,000 dead. Little known fact of Yemen, Saudi Arabia, the proxy country with American weapons, starving people to death, killing them. Killing, economically, through stress, anxiety, and weapons, and starvation. Set aside climate disruption. Just to feel, I'll close with this. I was at a conference in 1989 with the Dalai Lama, the year he won the Nobel Peace Prize. 3,000 psychotherapists were there, Buddhism and psychotherapy. Dalai Lama was asked the question, as I remember it, you're a spiritual hero of kindness. Do you have a mentor, someone who inspires you? And in short, he said, there's a man in Tibet called the Weeper, a man essentially who cries all the time, who's developing compassion and empathy as his spiritual journey. And what he does is he gets down metaphorically on his knees and looks into the eyes of someone suffering. Say hypothetically on this podcast right now, we brought someone into our home, call it a young Syrian girl who's lost her parents and her eyes and a leg, and she's in extreme post-traumatic stress disorder, can barely speak, and there she is. She evokes the most incredible empathy that we know. The Dalai Lama said the Weeper would cry and try to embody this girl's pain, but he could only cry. And the Dalai Lama said, why he's my hero is that at least he can cry. It's very hard for me to cry. But yet the Weeper still doesn't know exactly what to do to alleviate the pain. To think about where we're at on that spectrum of vulnerability and action. So that's what I say about vulnerability and crying. It may very well be that the greatest response right now is just simply to feel. And that's very treacherous, especially for men in power, spiritual, political. So.
Yeah, and I can tell you as a woman that cries a lot, I'm very in tune with crying. And especially when I'm in a group environment, I kind of tend to do the crying for the room. It's not easy because it's not, it's like regarded as something being wrong. And that's why, of course, there are things wrong, right? Like you said, the homicidal economy that we're all part of. But yeah, balancing that vulnerability and changing the way that we view and respect that.
I'm so down with another reason why the woman holds the power in many ways, for me, is the access to qualities of expression that are very new to me, which is crying and being vulnerable and without an answer and feeling more intimately into what I perceive often as an insecurity or the lack of safety, when in fact it becomes more safe. I'm surprised at how rewarded I am in a weird way, even on simple things on Instagram or Facebook or in public groups and talks where I somewhat admit for a couple of seconds vulnerability and actually feel it, how the whole energy softens. And I see the eyes and the hands and the body language of women, and it's like, it's captivating. And I go like, wow, that's so weird. It's so beautiful. And how simple it is, what I'm saying, and so natural to what you said. Yeah, I don't know why I said that, except thank you. Thank you for showing the way.
Thank you for this time. I know that there's going to be more time because I feel like you and I have a lot more to discuss. And I'm putting together a course, an online course on sacred leadership, sacred activism. I don't know which one it's going to be called, in the fall, in September. So I'd love for you to be a guest for that.
Sure.
Because I feel like we've tapped into not just the surface. We've gone deep, but there's deeper to go with this exploration.
Well, I actually wrote a book about this topic in 2003 called Instinct for Freedom, in which at that time I actually used the term mystical activist. This was before the term sacred activism came. And it was based upon my time both in a monk in war zones and with Aung San Suu Kyi, in which spiritual activism, a revolution of the spirit, became the political expression of putting your dharma and your yoga into action to transform society. And it was really rooted in what my teacher brought forth originally called spiritual intelligence, which I took then into mindful intelligence. And to me, it's a much more, for me personally, I've stopped the activism term and have brought more into what is mindful intelligence in context, which, wow, okay. Because you hear the word activism and it's like, okay, it's something about changing the world. Mindful intelligence in context means changing the world right here, right now, one person at a time, and maybe only one person, ever. So, but I'd be happy to be a part of whatever you're doing. I like you. Namaste.
Namaste, thank you so much.
You.
And can you share your website so people can go and find out where to find you and they can read your books? And
well, I thank you for that. I here obviously we're in Ubud, Bali. I do twice weekly Facebook Live broadcasts on Thursdays and Sundays, which is on my Facebook page, Alan Clements World Dharma. You can sign up for my Instagram page, which is Alan Clements World Dharma. Follow if you choose. My website is alanclements.com or worlddharma.com. I have different books. I wrote a book called Future to Believe in for my daughter when she was 5, and she and her mom are taking off for a year next year, which I'm thrilled to know that she's going to be traveling, possibly coming to Burma, possibly coming to Bali. And Instinct for Freedom is an interesting book for me. I did the book with Aung San Suu Kyi, The Voice of Hope. And that's me. If you're out there, you want to know anything, stay close, offer anything, be a part of my life. I live exclusively, now that I've abandoned the commercial side of life pretty much, by donations, whether it be a week or a month or annually on Patreon under Alan Clements or under my support page at worlddharma.com.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?